this is Ryan Jones from Serverless Guru. So in this video, we are going to be talking about things that worked well for me on my journey. Hopefully you can learn from my experience so you can kind of skip ahead some steps. So the first one, which is coming up a lot, so I do a podcast called the Talking Serverless Podcast. In that, I talk with different people in the industry, serverless, cloud computing, AWS, and there's a reoccurring theme that keeps happening, which is learning publicly. So one of the biggest ways you can learn publicly is blogs. So this would be just writing articles about what you're learning. So if you don't have your own online persona, I am Ryan Jones, I've got this blog, etc., what you can do is use topics that are coming up at work. So for instance, if you're being asked to create a database structure that you've never done before, you're going through all that documentation, you're learning things, and you're doing your own maybe outside of work type of research as well, then very easily what you could do is write an article about it. Of course, make sure to check in with people that you work with to make sure that it's all good, that you are basically sharing information that you might have learned a little bit at work, publicly, to make sure everyone's cool. They should be. Otherwise, maybe it's time to find a different job. So blogs can be a good one. What ends up happening out of that is that you can use Medium, you can use dev.to, and over the course of from late 2017, I started writing articles back in 2017, throughout 2018, 2019, and so on. I was writing articles. I wrote something like 50 to 60 articles through medium.com and some on the serverlessguru.com/blog website. And what happened with Medium is that we ended up hitting something like 30,000 readers a month. And a lot of those articles that were starting to get rolled out, I had written previously, and just over years, the traffic starts to pick up as the industry is kind of catching up to the content that was being written about. And so that's a really interesting thing, because what that allows for is there's even money that you can make from it. So for instance, on Medium, if you have a whole bunch of traffic and people are reading your content, you can end up making money from Medium. So that's one thing. I think dev.to probably has a similar program. Another thing that you could do is you could potentially build an audience, and you could monetize the audience. So for instance, maybe you're doing all this heavy research and you're looking at stuff, or maybe just people like your opinion. And so there's even paid newsletters and things like that you can do, or paid access to articles that you write. And so, obviously setting up paywalls, all that stuff, if you're more of an established brand, this can be a good route. But also, the idea of what you're working towards, if you're trying to work towards this point where you're spending all this time researching things, writing content about it, and sharing that knowledge with everybody else, and you can find a path forward with that, that's one option that you can do, is you can monetize the audience that way. And so that's kind of a cool thing. Otherwise, it's good for jobs. It's evidence of your ability to do the work that you're saying you can do. So if you apply for a job for, let's say, serverless development, building REST APIs on AWS, and you have a deep dive tutorial of 4 different articles, and I'm speaking from personal experience, we actually hired someone who had this, and they didn't have as much on paper experience, but because they had these articles, we were able to see, and the templates and the GitHub repository behind it, we were able to evaluate that as well. And so that's a good way to almost build up this material about yourself, even if you don't have that on paper experience from a job. So blogs are a great route for that. Sometimes writing text is easier than making a video like this. So that's a good way to go. Also, you have online courses. So if you're feeling like you're okay being on video and you're okay doing things like that, you can make a course. And one website that Serverless Guru uses is thinkific.com. And Thinkific is like a Wix version, but for course creation. So it allows you to build a website, allows you to basically create paywalls, allows you to create courses, sections, upload videos for it, add additional documents like quizzes, manage your users, have payouts through Stripe, and all that stuff. So you can do that through thinkific.com. And what's really nice about that too is this is a way that you can start having maybe passive income come in. So for instance, you make a course, you promote it, you spend time advertising it, and again, it works for other ways too, not just purely money coming in, but you can actually have it as evidence of your experience. And so then if you go to apply to a job and you said, hey, you want me to build this serverless application? Well, I actually have a 90 plus video course on how to build serverless applications where I've taught 500, 600 students how to do this. Even if that was a free course, it still has a lot of weight to it. And on top of that, you can use that content of those course videos to then write articles about, and that gets back to the blog side. So then you can build up the Medium side or the Dev.to side, as well as having a course. And then over the span of a year, 2 years, you may have enough income coming in, or that might have accelerated your career enough where you're in a much better financial state. So those are different things too. Videos, talked about that already with the course side, but videos are what they usually call like the top of content, right? Like this is the peak level of like content creation, because when you have a video like this, you have a visual form, which is what we have going right now, but we also have the content that's being written inside, right? It's like the transcript of that video, and the transcript of that video can then be chopped up and turned into articles as well, and each one of the sections that we're talking about now could actually have like a long form article. And so fast forward to a more fleshed out team, and you can imagine that somebody's recording a video that has that experience, and then there's a whole team behind that person which is turning it into additional forms of content, right? It could be short videos that are cut through this, it could be articles that are written based on this, and that's kind of more turning something like this video here into a much more robust like content pipeline. So getting to the core of what this one was about, learn publicly. So as you're getting started in new things, write about it, make videos about it, turn it into a course. It helps in all areas, and it's something that you can stand behind, and it's something that nobody else has to approve, right? You can write that article without approval. You can make that video without approval. You can make that course without approval. You don't need that stamp from society to say that you're good enough to make that article. Just go for it. Number 2 on this list is believe if someone else can do it, so can you, right? So if someone else has done it in the past with the same, we're all humans, right? Hopefully listening to this, right? Hello, aliens. But if we're all humans and someone else has been able to climb Mount Everest, you can climb Mount Everest too, right? If you have some type of handicap, and maybe this is slightly different than that, but just assuming more of, broad brush, right? If someone else has been able to do something and they align with who you are as well, right? So maybe they match nationality, they match country of origin, maybe they match like educational background, same like family status, all those different things, and then they've been able to achieve something, you have the ability to do that too. And even if they're from a different country of origin, all that stuff, it might have like there might be more steps there, but you can still do it too, right? And so have that believe that, because otherwise what are you believing, right? Like if you believe that you can't do something, you've already kind of lost at the very beginning, right? But if you believe that you can do something, maybe you could be the first person with all these things against it to do it, right? And so I carry this mentality in everything that I do. I believe that if someone can build a rocket, if I spent enough time trying to learn rocket engineering, whatever that looks like, I would be able to build a rocket too. And the reality of that is I think it's true, right? If you could pause time right now and you could learn to play piano for the next 100 years and you didn't age at all, you'd probably be a pretty good piano player, maybe the best in the world, right? So you would catch up with every other person that's playing piano, and eventually you would surpass them potentially in your piano playing ability just because of raw time spent. And so if it's just a mere thing of time, then if you had as much time, then you could actually do what they do. So keeping that in mind is helpful, because then it allows you to see differences in people, and you don't have to really compare yourself to them because they're just ahead in that journey, but you could also catch up to them. And people are starting at different starting points and at different periods in time, and so it's just a matter of when, not if. So keep stepping outside your comfort zone. So this is a big one. It goes back to learn publicly. So one big thing is that to have growth, you really do have to step outside your comfort zone. It's not going to be given to you where you are, right? Usually there's something that you have to do to get that growth, and that growth might come with pain, it might come with hardship and all those things, and that's just part of the process of growing, right? And so if I'm trying to hit a new level in my career, or I'm trying to learn some new skill, to get that new skill, to get that growth from that skill, I then have to put myself through hours of documentation reading, an online course, all things that I wouldn't do naturally, but I have to put on my plate to then get to that next level of growth. So to do that, put yourself outside your comfort zone, try to do things that you may be uncomfortable with at first, with the idea that that is what it takes to have that growth, and also at some point you become comfortable with anything, usually. So If you want to write blog articles, start with something small, something that's a sizable amount. There's a quote, if you want to eat an elephant, eat a chunk at a time. So start with one chunk, and then over time, you'll get really good at that chunk, and you move to the next chunk, and you'll get really good at that chunk. You end up building these layers of expertise, and then over time, you're way out in the middle of the ocean because you've been working on it so much in an iterative fashion that you just kind of do it naturally. Next up here is clean up your online avatar. So this would probably be for people that are early in their career, and I'll say early in their career with, let's say LinkedIn, for instance. So if I'm evaluating as a recruiter for a tech company, I'm going to also evaluate the LinkedIn profile. And so I want to see, proper grammar. I want to see like job history. I want to see what you did at that job. I want to see skills that you have. I want to see testimonials from other people that you work with. I want to see certifications if you have it. I want to see what type of groups that you're involved in. And then on top of that, if I can see blogs, that's great. If I can see courses, even better. If I can see any talks that you've given. So, when we talked about writing articles, write a couple for LinkedIn as well, right? Try that out. Try out medium.com, try out dev.to, figure out what works for you, and then maybe just dive, straight into one area, right? I've seen people be successful in all those different areas, just spending, focusing in their time there. So, but by cleaning up your online avatar, what you're doing is you're giving the best version of yourself for recruitment purposes, as well as if you're more in a, let's say for me, for instance, I'm the founder of Serverless Guru, and I have to wear that business executive hat. And so my online portfolio, my online, avatar is going to have a version of myself which all plays into that same storyline, right? And so that would be something here that's not listed, is align your story, right? Make sure that everything that's happening fits in, like flows with it, right? So like whatever you're trying to get to, whatever you're trying to say about yourself, make sure that all the stuff is supporting evidence for it, right? The one thing that ends up making a story very hard to, the second you get a hard, complex story, the audience falls away, right? So you want to make sure that all of it kind of moves together. And so if you're trying to become a senior cloud developer, then all your cloud development experience plays a bigger role, right? If you start including things like when you were IT support and so on, that starts to muddy the waters a bit. If you start adding in additional things prior to that aren't even related to tech, it starts to muddy the water a little bit. It plays a role in saying like, hey, I've had job history, but really like the whole thing is like, it's a flow of like who you are. And so I think that just keeping that as like a lens to look at from, which is, does this piece of information communicate what I want it to communicate for where I want to be right now? And if it doesn't, can I modify it in a way so that it does support that? Is there something that happened in that job role which supports that thing that I'm trying to get to right now? So if you're in that IT technical support desk and now you're becoming a developer, and you're trying to find out, how do I make that gap work? Well, what type of things did you do in that role that are similar to what you would be doing as a developer? Well, you probably had meetings with different people on your team. You probably had to understand some type of technology. You probably had to look into a different set of tools, right? Maybe it was like Jira Service Desk or some type of Confluence, things like that. All things that we use as developers. Maybe you use Jira. So understanding how that works, understanding maybe how to communicate those things in relation to that role that you're trying to get to, those are all really positive. So clean up your avatar there. Next up, we have trust the process. So when it comes to trusting the process, what this really means is small inches every day add up, and you can't really shortcut it sometimes. So I say sometimes because sometimes you can shortcut it, but it's like that whole thing with this, like, let's say somebody won the lottery, right? They get, $100 million, and maybe, sometimes they lose all that money, right? And you might be able to make an argument that they lose all that money because they didn't actually have the levels that it takes to get to that level, right? They just skip to it. And when they skip to it, they don't have all the growth that requires to stabilize with that level. And so you can very easily, lose all of it on bad investments and things like that, just because you haven't built up that tolerance through, repetition, practice, all that stuff over many years. So trust the process, trust that where you are right now is moving you forward towards it. Even this recording, right? Like I'd like to get to the point where these YouTube videos for Serverless Guru's channel are awesome, and our courses are awesome, and our blogs are awesome, and our joint webinars are great, and our sales are great, our marketing is great, and we're just taking over the world, right? But I know that to do that, it's very small things incrementally over a long period of time. And so right now, I'm like 3 years into Serverless Guru and to making those little, inches every day. And I can't shortcut too far into the future, because at some point I'm sacrificing something, right? So like if I shortcut to some big sale, but I'm not actually able to support that client, then ultimately it's going to fail and have a much bigger ripple effect in a negative way than a positive way. And there is something where if you do have something like that happen, you can go back to that other one, which is believe that you can do it. Also outside your comfort zone, right? So like if somebody gives you an opportunity, you can step up and arise to that occasion, right? But if there's too many things going on at once, then that's where things can start falling apart. And so just be confident in that this position you're in right now is leading you to that future state, and everything that you do today will lead you there. Be creative in your approach, right? So this is like jobs, right? So interesting thing about jobs, so how did I start my career? I went to a programming school in Portland, Oregon for being a developer, and I was taking online courses, and I was doing online college at a community college in Portland for programming and taking like all programming classes. Honestly, the college classes didn't really help. The online courses sort of helped, like confidence wise, because I understand like more vocabulary in the field and all that stuff, and that does play a role. The accountability of being there every day in person at the code school, that was probably one of the biggest things. But in reality, all of those things kind of combined together, which was great. And so by the end of it, I had all these skills, and I saw the jobs for junior developers, and I was like, I feel like if I'm a junior developer at a company right now, I'm going to use like 5% of what I just learned, right? And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to use all of it. So instead, I was like, how can I get a role at a company that probably won't give me the ability to, let's say do backend stuff that early on? And so I was like, okay, I'll create a startup. In that startup, I'll do all the backend stuff, right? I don't need approval for it. I'm just going to do my own thing. And so I just started working on my own stuff. I recruited a whole bunch of people that were in my class with me, and then we started building like a online version of DynamoDB, where you didn't have to have an AWS account. So a modern equivalent of it today, which we were like not even 1% of what Dynabase is, but that's kind of the idea of it, was like, let's give a visualization of a DynamoDB table through a UI, and that was back in like mid 2017. I didn't have enough technical chops, cloud chops, all that stuff to actually pull that off at the time. But what it did do is that it became evidence for my ability for higher level jobs than a junior developer. And that was because I put myself through this crazy period of trying to understand how to build cognito authentication, which is for users, all that stuff for the application. So it stores like users, it stores information about the users, it allows for the login, sign up, forgot password, all those different flows, and it's also works with other AWS services as the authentication piece. And so here I am, I'm at a code school, made a startup, building this backend thing, learning AWS, learning serverless, learning authentication, learning cognito authentication, which was very new at the time, like mid 2017. So all that stuff was like kind of new. And so out of that, very frustrating, lots of time, lots of documentation, lots of reading forums, issues, and so on. But because of that process, I was able to get a whole bunch of growth. And now when I saw a job posting for Nike, I actually matched like 80% of what a senior software developer had around AWS specifically. So infrastructure as code piece with like serverless framework, Lambda, Cognito, all that stuff was listed. And that's exactly what I was doing for like 12 plus weeks or whatever, just like 8 hours a day with a group of people building this app out. And so I was able to have something I could stand behind and understood. And also because all this stuff was so early on, lucky in that form that I was able to apply for this and get it. And so be creative in the approach. So if you don't have that stamp of approval, give it to yourself, right? So if you're, if you have to, it's like the article thing, right? So like maybe there's like this whole flow to get published inside of a major article thing, right? And so if you're only trying to get into that, and that's like your barrier of entry, just go around it, write your own articles, right? Submit it on Twitter, on Reddit, share it in the community, like just build that up over time. And ideally a year or 2 years later, they'll come knock on your door versus the other way around, right? And so that's a creative approach. Also meetups. So if you see any meetups that are happening, any things that you could do networking around, talk to people, get an idea for what they're looking for, and also keep building your skills on the side, doing things like blogs, all that stuff. And if you can build a project like I was doing this startup thing where it's just this, almost like a side project, right? Build that side project over time, maybe write articles about that side project, make videos about that side project, use all that stuff as evidence for why you are qualified for that job, and then include all those things when you apply. And that's almost like a very creative way to not just say, hey, company X stamps off on me and I worked there for 2 years. Okay, but what did you actually do there? All this stuff. Here I have 10 articles, I've got 5 videos, I've got a side project with all this documentation and real code that you can look at, and now I can really evaluate this candidate versus a candidate with 2 years of experience with none of that stuff, because then I have to just trust that they are actually able to do the job, but I can't really tangibly see it. And so in some ways you can actually jump past people with work experience because they don't have that same amount of resources behind who they are. Last one here as we wrap up is feel the fear and do it anyway. This was a quote from a friend, which is basically when you feel like you're fearful of something, feel that, but don't let it stop you, right? And I guess recently I went skydiving and I did my first solo skydive, and I think that that's something where skydiving is, there's a lot of fear there. It's kind of scary, right? You're 14,000 feet up, door opens, you hear the wind coming through like the plane, you feel your adrenaline start spiking. You see this guy that's whoever your instructor is or whatever, basically giving you like the let's go, let's do it, and you're just like, yeah, okay. And then you have to climb out, hold on to the side of it. Your head's outside the plane and you feel the wind just hitting you as you're like going hundreds of miles, like 100 miles per hour in like a tiny prop plane. And then you basically go up, down, jump out, right? And that, definitely there's fear there. But, the way that I try to think about it is I try to compartmentalize a little bit of that. I try to go like, when I'm on the ground, why am I scared of being in a plane, right? And I think Will Smith has a good video about this, is, he was at home that night before they were going to go skydive, and he's like, afterwards he was like, why am I scared about jumping out of the plane? I'm not even standing in the plane yet, right? And so a lot of that is just like you build it up mentally in your head. So the way that I try to think about this, and probably easier said than done, and maybe this takes just years of practice, is I try to compartmentalize that fear and the things that I'm going to do. And so when I think about the plane, right, and I think about jumping out, I understand the full roadmap of it, right? I get into the plane, I put the gear on, I get in the plane, we fly up, we circle until we get to like 14,000 feet, hang outside the plane, jump out, go through all the procedures, pull the parachute. If something happens, pull the, cut away, pull the release parachute, and out of that, or the reserve parachute, out of that, hopefully, then steer to the landing, land the parachute, so on, right? However, I'm not worried about the landing. I'm not worried about pulling the parachute. I'm not worried about standing outside the plane. I'm not worried about being in the plane. If I'm standing on the ground, what I'm worried about is that gear, right? And so that's how I go about thinking about this, like compartmentalize each one of those steps. And so the nervousness is purely around the gear. Like, is it on me properly? Do I have the proper position when I'm on the ground? And then once I get in the plane, am I locked in? Do I have the seatbelt on properly? Am I secure here? Okay, great. All right, next step is he's standing outside the plane. Now I have to stand outside the plane, and I'm only thinking about it on a layer like that at a time. And I think that's a helpful way of doing it. So feel the fear, do it anyway, learn publicly, believe if somebody else can do it, so can you. Keep stepping outside your comfort zone whenever you have the chance to. Even create opportunity for yourself to step outside your comfort zone, right? So if running's not your thing, maybe run, right? If swimming's not your thing, maybe go swim, right? Like try stuff that like you don't like doing. Maybe you tried it and you still don't like doing it, but there's growth in like all areas. And the thing is, like, this, like Steve Jobs said, you can't connect the dots looking forward, only looking backward. And so we don't know, like maybe you don't like swimming, but maybe by swimming and then walking back from wherever you're swimming from, that then leads to something that then changes the rest of your life, right? And that's really hard to understand, that our human brains, like we go like, I understand path, right? Like the path goes forward, and I understand what happens on that path, and then the result of that path, right? So like walk to swimming, swim, walk back, right? But in reality, there's like this huge like amount of different pathways that open up the second that we do anything, right? Recording this video might lead to something else tomorrow, right? And then that might lead to something else. And all I did was record a video, but now I'm like way off in way off in this other place because of this one thing. And so sometimes that feeling of uncomfort has a big effect on other areas, and you can't really see that. So I would say try stuff out, take a risk, go for it, clean up your online avatar, make sure that all your story is aligning with where you want to go. Trust the process. So by trusting the process and taking small inches every day, they'll add up into where you want to be. Be creative in the approach. So think about like, how are things done today, and what do people not do enough of, right? Maybe there's not enough architecture diagrams in articles. Maybe reviewing of articles through a reaction video on YouTube is not really done. Maybe doing something through like social media that usually people don't do is a new way of doing it, right? Maybe that's the way to build your audience, is do threads that would normally be in an article, or maybe take your article, take pieces of your article, turn that into a thread, and use that as your promotion, right? Like there's different creative ways to do stuff, right? And just play around with it, try it out, and then lastly, feel the fear, do it anyway. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thanks for watching. This was some things that worked well for me, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or other things that worked well for you, drop them in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Peace.